there are videos of Chávez saying, being rich is bad, with a Rolex on his wrist. It's as if they're mocking you with what they're saying. But in every socialist dictatorship, the dictator has become a rich man, right? And, but people will tell you, imagine, let's try to steelman this argument. They will tell you that, well, it's because they did it wrong. If I was the socialist dictator, I would be a good dictator. I would be a benevolent dictator, as we say in economics, when you have a benevolent central planner. The reality is that even if you were a benevolent dictator, and assuming that you will always have a benevolent dictator, which obviously you can't guarantee, this system still doesn't work because you don't have all the information to manage the economy that people individually do. If you manage where people go to school, where people eat, what they buy from the store, what people produce, you don't know people's preferences. That's why the Soviet Union always had these problems where they had too much of one thing, too little of another.
Persistent shortages.
Yes. For example, they made pants of the same amount of pants of different colors. And they didn't think that people would like some colors more than others. And so they always ran out of the popular blue jeans. And so blue jeans became like a really scarce good in Eastern Europe. So these kinds of things, right? They don't think that because they're not profit maximizing.
One of the things I remember seeing is there was an image of an American, let's just call it slum. That's what it would have been called. A poor area. I think it might have even been in New York City. And it was a picture of an apartment complex. And this was distributed in the Soviet Union as an attempt to tell the public, look at how terrible America is. Look at their desperate poverty and inequality. And what the propagandists didn't realize is that, but the public saw very quickly, was that when you looked inside the windows, like most of the people had televisions, their lights were on, and it caused a real problem because the actual Soviet citizens, seeing this alleged poverty, saw working poor living better than they were. And it was not even, and I almost think that it's another example of like elites being detached from their own people, that the propagandists didn't even realize how much worse their own people were living than this picture, because they were living better than the picture themselves.
I'll tell you a story I learned. I'm a speaker for YAF, Young America's Foundation, and they own the Ronald Reagan Ranch. If you go to the ranch, you see that Reagan had like an Exxon pump of gas. And when he took Gorbachev to the ranch, Gorbachev was amazed that there was a gas pump in his house. And so he asked him, does every American have a gas pump in their house? And Reagan just, because he just wanted to mess with him, said, oh, yeah, don't you in the Soviet Union? And Gorbachev was totally shocked about it because they couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it because they really didn't know how life was, even the leaders of the Soviet Union in a free country.
So what are some of the most shocking things that an American high school student would learn if they could be taken safely to Venezuela and spend a week living there like an average Venezuelan citizen?
It would be the utilities, probably. That would be one of the first and most shocking things, right? No electricity at random times, sometimes for a very long time. No water. Another thing that would probably be very shocking, and we're putting them in safety, right? So they're not suffering from the crime, which is also a big issue in Venezuela, which makes it worse than perhaps many other socialist nations. Venezuela has a very high crime problem. Cuba doesn't have, like Venezuela, this problem. Another big thing would be that everything is so expensive and people really make very little money. So Maduro recently actually released the price control. So there are no more shortages in Venezuela. You don't have to line up. You just have to pay international market prices for food, right? Which means several dollars of US dollars per gallon of milk, right? But what an average person makes a month in Venezuela now is about $100. So how are you going to feed yourself? And that's assuming you have a house, right? If you don't have a house, you're likely going to be on the street, or you're likely going to have to collect trash or steal or eat really from the garbage to survive, which is what many Venezuelans are. I think that the average high school kid in the U.S., if they were dropped off in Venezuela, even regardless of the crime, the first thing they would try to do is save money or find a way to leave. That's what they would do, which is what Venezuelans are doing, right? They would have no teachers in school because teachers fled the country. They would have, this would happen to me very often in high school. The teacher would dismiss class because she found that there was chicken or toilet paper or any rice, whatever that she needed in the grocery store where her friend works down the street. So that she was called or got a text in the middle of class, hey, Maria, chicken is going to arrive. Better hurry up before people line up. And, Maria would dismiss class because she's there for her family. A totally reasonable thing to do. But what are the consequences for education of kids, right? You have no biology teacher suddenly for a full semester. Kids are becoming illiterate in Venezuela. I saw it myself in New York City when a kid came to my church with his dad seeking to be baptized from Venezuela as part of the border crisis, and the kid didn't know how to read or write in Spanish at 9. Never.
One of the things, what's the current state of malnutrition? Because one of the numbers I've seen is that, and it's hard to argue with this. This is like the most basic human thriving question, is that people have shrunk. They're starving. So what's that? What? How do you understand what's happening to like basic like calories available for Venezuelan people?
You know how Venezuelans call that the thinning of the population, the Maduro diet.
Ugh.
And it's funny because Maduro has only gotten fatter.
It's like a visual
There was even a time when he was on national TV where he didn't know that the camera turned on, and he was literally getting an empanada out of his desk and eating it on TV. These are the kinds of incidents. These are the kinds of incidents that happen in our TV. It really kept us entertained, at least. He could also show up on your TV whenever he wanted. By the way, that was part of the telecommunications law.
Wait. So you're in your living room with periodic TV. Power.
Yeah.
And could he turn the TVs on?
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, they didn't have that tech.
We're not that technologically advanced. But yeah, if you were watching something, he would appear in your TV on any national channel.
Eating an empanada.
Yeah.
Great.
And sometimes, one time at least, that I remember, there was a blackout in the middle of the TV streaming in the place where he was streaming from. No, not in our house. So the streaming suddenly ended, and he was so mad about that, because they couldn't even keep the lights on for themselves. But you asked about malnutrition. So yes, they call it the Maduro diet, and I can tell you, my aunt was a preschool teacher in Venezuela until she left, and she would have kids that would faint in class, in the middle of class, because they hadn't had dinner or breakfast. They only ate once a day. And she would try to bring as much food as she could to help some of the kids. It was extremely sad.
Argentina has gone through something similar, though not as extreme, it seems, right? With the Peronists. So this is a slightly less full communism, more like fascistic populism, as I understand it.
Yeah, I would understand it in the same way.
Sort of cult of personality, populist fascism, crooked cronies that ripped off the country and destroyed it. You now have Javier Milei, who's the most radically free market president, I think, in the history of planet Earth.
I would say so, yes.
I mean, he calls himself on the international stage an anarcho-capitalist, which is like on the spectrum from Stalin. If you're going to be opposite Stalin,
he's on the other end.
It's like Murray Rothbard. I think he might have a dog that he named Murray.
He has several dogs which were cloned, by the way, which is also insane.
Yeah. So how do you understand what he's trying to do and what's happening there?
I'm very happy about it. You're right. The Peronists didn't quite destroy Argentina like Venezuela, but they were on their way. And that's why Cristina Fernandez, who has been finally declared guilty and sentenced to 6 years in prison, by the way, the former president, for her corruption, she was a very good friend of Hugo Chávez, extremely close friends. And Argentina was an ally in the international stage. Argentina also incredibly destroyed its economy. And the big reason was that they spent all this money. They used the central bank to print money to pay for it. So that creates inflation, right?
Yeah.
So when Javier Milei assumed office as president, inflation was at about 200% annualized, and it was scheduled to go up to thousands, right? If it kept up.
Yeah.
And so he did what many people thought was impossible politically, which was balance the budget immediately in 1 month. I didn't honestly expect him to be that successful.
And is it sustaining? Because my first thought when I saw that was, did he kick the can and like
No.
and like when the final year is assessed, it was like kind of like a dip and then an explosion, or is it sustained?
That's what many people thought, but no. People thought he wasn't going to be able to politically sustain it. Not that he legally couldn't. He legally could. Because the Argentinian president has much more budgetary power than, say, an American president.
Okay.
That's really the reason, right?
that's
You couldn't
interesting.
do that in the U.S.
Yeah. Social Security and Medicare, which constitute half the budget.
Yeah, he
not
literally
change.
lowered pensions in real terms. So pensioners are receiving less pensions adjusted for inflation.
And they haven't strung him up in the streets.
That's what's impressive, right? That he has kept, not only have they not overthrown him, but like he still has over 50% popularity in the polls. Because I think Argentinians, he was able to persuade them that you needed this radical change. Remember, his inauguration speech began or ended with, "There is no money." And he just cut government spending. No transfers to the provinces, no more infrastructure spending, reduced pensions and elimination of subsidies, balancing the budget. Now inflation has fallen radically. He's begun deregulating, reducing taxes as well, especially on imports and exports. Argentina is one of the few countries in the world that taxes its exports. It's actually its main source of revenue.
Interesting.
Taxes on agricultural exports, soybeans especially. Now those taxes have been reduced with the goal of encouraging more exports. I think that the next step now is to eliminate fully the currency and capital controls and eventually dollarize.
And I saw him explain, he was recently on the Lex Friedman podcast, and he was talking about that he took some heat from classical liberal people, weirdly, shockingly to me, that he was actually maintaining certain controls. I think it might have been capital controls.
Yes.
So how do you understand what happened there? Because there were things he couldn't do right away.
That's right. Because it had to do with a really weird financial instrument that the central bank had issued that would have led to massive inflation if he had done it for a few months. And he thought it was too politically risky. And I agree. And, it doesn't matter anymore because it's over.
Yeah.
The black market exchange rate is now essentially the same as the official exchange rate. So I think at any point in the future, he will release capital controls like in a surprise announcement.
Is Milei the most exciting thing happening in South America? How do you understand is he an aberration? Is he a sign of we have had enough oppression and socialist, communist, fascist rule, and we are ready to accept the transition to something that actually works?
I would say so. And in part it was because Argentina didn't become a dictatorship outright, right? There were still free elections, even if they weren't really fair, but they were free. People could vote and there wasn't cheating.
They were able to count their votes faster than California.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is like, what are we doing?
And it's on paper, and there's no mail, everything's better. There's ID, it's much more secure actually. But it's true that people do get bribed to vote in Argentina by the welfare programs and by people who manage them. So that is a big problem.
Yeah.
In many Latin American countries and around the world, really. I think a lot of people, I would say yes, Milei is the most exciting thing happening in Latin America overall. I think a lot of people incorrectly praise Bukele as a really exciting thing in El Salvador. I think it's a mistake because even though he has obviously been very successful at reducing crime, there's a lot of other problems that Bukele brings that Milei doesn't. Among them, he's not really a free market person. He was a member of the Socialist Party. Not only that, but, his family has a lot of corruption deals with the Venezuelan government. He has like a shadow cabinet of Venezuelan advisors, which is always very weird, right? As a Salvadoran president. And then the other big issue is that he essentially legally reelected himself, right? He packed the Supreme Court of El Salvador when they disagreed with him. And then, even though the Constitution didn't allow for immediate re-election of the president, he managed to get the Supreme Court to reread the Constitution, what it said in plain Spanish, and then he ran for re-election. And so, as much as I would say he's been successful, I think if you are so popular, right, as he was, why wouldn't you go through the process of amending the Constitution to allow for re-election, if that's what you want, right? If he supposedly has 90% popular support, why can't you amend the Constitution to reflect that? I think that, when you start destroying the institutions of a democracy, that's when, you really lose me.
If you like this clip, you should check out the full video and all the other great content we've got at Dad Saves America. So be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that bell so you won't miss our new stuff as it drops each week.